cash, because we could have the casualties in Japan and on an operating table 5 days after injury, which was time enough to close most of their wounds, which had been debrided originally at the time of injury in Vietnam. So they were stabilized for about 36 hours and then flown to us. And we routinely anesthetized them and undid their dressings the next day. And were able to close most of the wounds. Then, of course, we got post-operative complications or more extensive injuries were also sent at an appropriate time. But they were staged in Japan before being sent back to the United States.
And so what happened next in your career then?
Then I was fortunate enough to come back to San Francisco to do my thoracic, my chest surgery residency at Letterman Hospital. And I stayed on the staff at Letterman for 2 more years. And then I had an opportunity to get out of the Army, and by that time, frankly, I was disillusioned by the Vietnam War.
Oh, really?
And could muster very little enthusiasm. I had a lot of enthusiasm for the people I was taking care of, but the fact that we were getting draftees sent back to us in a steady stream from a war I considered unnecessary disenchanted me.
But anyway, after you finished your thoracic residency, then
Spent, as I say, 2 years on the staff here at Letterman, and then I got out of the Army and entered private practice here in San Francisco.
And what year is that?
71.
Okay, and what happened since 71?
Well, I had a wonderful career practicing thoracic surgery here in San Francisco. I retired from full-time practice in, I guess, 1996 or so. And
So how many years is that? Let's see, 71, 96, 81, 91.
25 years.
25.
But it was after 13 years in the Army.
Oh!
So it was a total of 38 years altogether.
You haven't worked hard enough.
After semi-retiring, I assisted at cardiac surgery for another 4 years until I quit in 2000. And
you did? You totally retired for your thoracic practice?
Totally retired from the active practice of surgery, yeah.
I mean, you still have some kind of management role in the...
What I'm doing now is a labor of love, really. I'm interviewing patients in California who are requesting permission or authorization to use cannabis medically.
Okay. But before we get into that, Tom, something I want to hear a little bit from you about is, you've heard the expression it's sometimes hard to tell the forest for the trees, and from your observations of, it's been about 5 or 6 years or something since we met, and I became aware of your interest and involvement with the war on drugs. And I'm just curious what your kind of the big picture is. I mean, as a physician, as 2 physicians together here, I mean, it's been kind of remarkable to me that there hasn't been more of a physician voice in this whole thing that's going on. It's kind of like it's something that was a concept born of the legal profession, by the legal profession, and for the legal profession. At the same time, the movement, normal and so forth, there's nothing that gives the legal profession more credibility, in a sense, is the people, the attorneys who are active in trying to make change. But what I'm saying is that, like, on the individual small issue, somebody that's been busted somewhere that may go to jail, if the legal people or in any court case, they would, the attorneys would get the best expert witness that they could possibly find to represent, their case. But when it but that's in a specific case. But in regards to the general health of society, in, so to speak, a way of life, so to speak, it seems like the individuals within the movement, rather than drawing from the kingpins of medicine, so to speak, the cardiovascular surgeons, would rather, it's what you said, it's like physicians are marginalized somehow, and instead it's nothing against chiropractors and holistic, whatever, broad term that is, but what's going on here?
Well, I think that physicians have been scared out of the drug war. Actually, it began a long time ago when the Harrison Act was passed back in 1914, not to be too dry and academic, but I'm doing that anyway.
Well, okay.
The idea was that they were using the physicians to record, a small tax was paid on every narcotic transaction. Overseen by the physician, in other words, his prescription. So it's just a way to keep track of who was using and not to interfere in any way. Well, a few years later, they began prosecuting those doctors who were signing lots of prescriptions. And that was the nose of the camel coming under the tent. And the early Supreme Court cases all involved doctors, right from 1915 through 1925. And of course, by carefully choosing their opposition, the government won case after case and established their right to essentially usurp this practice, this part of practice from physicians. And the war on drugs that Nixon declared in '72 is just an intensification of the same idea. Just nothing changed. It was just more money and a few different laws to intensify the prosecution of drug users. The war on drugs shifted a lot from physicians in the beginning to patients or to users or to addicts later on.
I mean, actually, your involvement was more a matter of the war on drugs in general, the harmful effects, if you will, of the war on drugs, as opposed to marijuana specifically.
Right, I came on board pretty much as a theoretical purist, and I thought that all prohibition was silly, and I didn't really differentiate much between marijuana and heroin, although the public did, and still does, of course. But you're right, I've moved from the theoretical back into the personal, and the reason for that is California's Proposition 215, and what I perceive finally is a need for physicians who are willing to stick their neck out and write recommendations.
And so that's what you've gotten into yourself here?
I started doing it gradually last year on the request of friends and acquaintances, but starting in November, I made myself available to some of the local so-called buyers clubs.
What's been your experience with this?
Well, there's a huge demand we haven't met because most physicians are unwilling to write these recommendations, and there are relatively few physicians who will do it.
Write a prescription for marijuana, literally?
Technically, it's not a prescription. That's an important differentiation. It's a recommendation. That's the way the initiative was written. So that the doctor isn't technically prescribing a medicine, and the patient's taking it with the doctor's advice. Now, it's sort of the lawyers would call it distinction without a difference. But the distinction is regarded as important. What it involves really is taking a very detailed history from the patient, looking at any x-rays or records that he has to support his claims, and then deciding on an individual basis if the patient, under the terms of the law, could be helped by the use of cannabis.
And what what kind of conditions have you been finding cannabis helpful for?
Well, as you well know, cannabis, the hemp plant provide so many functions.